Hi, everybody. It's Leslie with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, and I'm pleased to present Eric Spellman. Eric gives us great advice on all kinds of topics, and today's topic is going to be your website could be a lead generating machine. I want to remind everyone to type your questions in the Q&A. He picks them up throughout the entire presentation. So if you see something interesting, don't be shy, go ahead and type it in. Also, the New Mexico Small Business Development Center wants to strongly encourage New Mexico small businesses to be aware of the risks to their data and protect themselves against cyber criminals. We have a series of cybersecurity webinars on our YouTube channel, which I'll chat over the link, and also pre-recorded on demand on our website for you to view at your leisure. I'll turn it over to Eric for today's exciting topic.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Okay, well, this one's a good one because this one is talking about making your website a lead generating machine. But we kind of have to define what a lead is, don't we? When people visit your website, you don't know who they are. I mean, you can follow their footsteps, you know where they've been and how long they were there, but you really have no idea who they are. In order for someone to be counted as a lead, someone you might actually turn into a customer, you got to know who they are. So that's why I'm just going to lay this out right now. Purpose of a lead generating website is what? To generate leads. And if your website is not generating leads, and I mean weekly, regularly, then you need to listen up because I can quickly help you fix that. So let's get started. What is a lead worth? So many people have no clue what a lead is actually worth dollar-wise. Did you know that every lead you get actually has a dollar value associated? Well, Eric, how can you say that? I mean, they haven't bought anything yet. So how can there be a value on a lead? There actually is. When you start to see the value in dollars of a lead, that's when you're going to do what I tell you to do here. Okay. So let me explain very quickly how to figure that out. So step one, and by the way, don't feel like you have to write down every single thing you see here because my wonderful host will be happy to send it to you or let you download this entire presentation. So what I want you to do, if you're going to take notes, is pretty much focus on what I'm talking about as it applies to you. Maybe ideas you get about your company. So what is your average sale? Now, some of you go, well, we sell everything from $1 to $10,000, whatever. Figure out an average sale amount, okay? For whatever you sell, an average. Like if someone were to walk in your store and I was standing there right next to you and I said, okay, I'll bet you 20 bucks that their sale is going to be around what? That's what I want you to think of, that number. Now, for the purposes of math, which I'm not good at all, let's go with $100. Let's say that my average sale in whatever store this is $100, or whatever service I offer is $100. That if I get a customer, on average, I'm going to make $100 bucks. Next, how many leads do I currently get a week now? And people, you need to realize that you already are getting leads. Now, regardless of whether they're from your website or from word of mouth or from wherever, I want you to think, how many randomly seeming people are calling you or coming in asking about your services or products? Okay. How many on average? Now, once again, for the purposes of math, I'll say 10. So right now, what do we got so far? My average sale, if someone actually buys something, is $100 bucks. And the average number of people who just ask about what I do per week is about 10. Now, we're going to multiply that by our close rate. Now, what is a close rate? The close rate is a percentage chance that you're going to make the sale. In other words, if I were to put someone in front of you, if I were to bring someone, and yes, they're looking for what you sell. They're not just someone I dragged off the street kicking and screaming. No, we're not kidnapping anybody. I'm saying if someone were looking for what you sell and I were to sit them down in front of you, what is the percentage chance that you would actually close the sale? Now, most businesses, especially if they've been around a while, they would say upwards of 75, even 90% chance of closing the deal. But you need to figure that out for you. Now, once again, for the purposes of math, let's say I'm not as good as you. And so my close rate is 50%. Okay. So in other words, if you bring me 2 leads, I'll close 1. Now we divide that by the amount of leads per week. Now, what that means basically is how many leads are we getting a week? We're getting 10. And what is our close rate? 50%. So, and what is our average sale? $100. Basically, each lead is worth $50. In other words, put it this way. Here's an easier way of explaining it. If I bring in 10 leads, now if we sell to all of them, I'll make what? $1,000, because each one would become a customer and each one would buy $100 worth of services or products. And so if I sold every single one of those leads, 10 of them, I'd get $1,000. But my close rate's only 50%. So I'm only going to sell half of them. So I'm only going to, it takes 10 people to make $500. Or each lead is worth $50. Does this make sense? When you start to realize that those seemingly random phone calls and those people who just walk in off the street are worth $50 a piece, or whatever your number is, you'll take them more seriously. And hopefully that kind of thinking will help you take the rest of this session a little more seriously as well. Because my goal is to bring in a heck of a lot more leads, which will turn into a heck of a lot more money. Step 1, let's define your target demographic. Now, what the heck is a target demographic? Think of the target demographic as your perfect customer. Now, people always ask me, Eric, everyone is my customer. Shut the heck up. Don't you ever say everyone is your customer, because it's not true. I just want to reach through the screen and slap you if you say that. Your perfect customer is, well, here's the easy way to think of it. You need to think of a person. And the example I like to give is this. I want you to think of your current customer list. And I want you to pick one customer by name, an actual person in your head. And I want you to, you're saying, well, which one do I pick? Here's your criteria. I want you to think of your one customer who you make the most money from and get the least amount of grief. Did you hear that? I want you to think of that one person by name that you make the most money from and get the least amount of grief from. In other words, if you could clone them and only do business with them, you'd be pleased as punch. I mean, you'd just be rolling in money and happy. That person is your perfect customer, and that person is who you need to target. Do not target everyone, or you will get no one. Okay? You need to laser focus on that person. And not only that, you need to think of them as a person. In other words, I recommend you create a persona. Now, a persona is where you actually give this person a name. It really helps. I know this sounds silly because they don't exist. Sorry, got an itchy throat. But you want to create a persona and give them a name. For instance, back when I was making websites, I named my persona Mildred. Okay. I actually pictured her in my head, and I looked at her age. I looked at her, where she lived. I looked at who she hung out with, whether she was married or single, how much money she made, what she did for a living. I came up with all of that by thinking of my customers. Where do they live? Maybe you're not, maybe you think you're targeting the entire city where you live or the entire state. Your customers don't all live all over the place. The majority, and your best customers, remember, your perfect customers, probably live somewhere similar. What is their average age? What is their relationship status? Like I said, if you think back to your perfect customer, remember, we want their clones. We want their friends. We want people just like them. And of course, what is their career? What is their income? What are their interests? And I want you to give them a name. And by the way, I'm not here to say that you only have one perfect customer. Different companies have different product lines, and different companies have different services. And you may have a perfect customer for each one. Yeah, this is going to take some work. But I promise if you actually do this, if you actually start thinking of who your perfect customer is and you focus your efforts to target them, oh my gosh, your business is going to just blow up. It'll be amazing. You must appeal to them. Too many times we try to appeal to everyone. And I'm telling you, that's wasted dollars. That's wasted marketing. That's wasted advertising. That's not what we want to do at all. We want to appeal to our perfect customer, our perfect customers, our what? Target demographic. Next, we need to build content to attract searches. Searches by who? Our target demographic. So I like to say this, and you've heard me say this before, and that's why I'm going to reiterate it and say it over and over and over and over. What problem do you solve? Now, I know some of you may think that's a weird thing to say. It's a weird question. What do you mean, what problem, Eric? You're not talking about our products. You're not talking about our services. That's what our content is about. No. Your content should be, at least in part, what problem do you solve? Here's another way of thinking about it. And you're going to get mad when I tell you this. No one wants what you sell. No one. They want the value that it brings. They don't want your product. They don't want your service. They want the value that it brings. No one wants a shovel. They want a hole. And when you start to think in terms of that logic, all of a sudden, your business takes on a new life. Too many times we're in business for so long, we actually think people want our products and services. We think our products and services are what we should be pushing, when in fact they're not. You see, on the internet, people tend to look for about three things. Okay. And one of the first is, what problem do you solve? If they have a problem, they're going to type in what? The problem. And if your website doesn't talk about the problem and all you talk about is a solution, you'll never be found. Think about it. If all a plumber talks about is his solutions and what he does, and he never talks about clogged toilets or clogged drains or broken pipes, if he never talks about those, then he's never going to show up when people do a search on those. Okay. So I want you to think real closely. What problem does your service or product solve? Now, for some of you, that may not be easy. Like, what if you're an accountant? What problem do you solve? Think about it. You'll figure it out. What question do you answer? Believe it or not, most people, when they go to the internet, when they go to Google or Google something, they ask a question. So my question to you is, what question does your product or service answer? What is the question where you are the answer? Once again, you may want to bring some of your staff in on these little questions and do a little brainstorming. And a lot of people have never thought about their companies in this way. But like I said, when you start creating the content on your website to focus on the problems that you solve and the questions that you answer. I mean, heck, most of the videos that I do, believe it or not, are questions. Questions that I feel people are typing in on the internet, that I've researched and found out people are typing on the internet. And if my question is the exact same question that people are typing in, who do you think Google's going to serve up in those results? That's right, me. So what question do you answer? Also, what will make them pay attention? Why should I even read something? I'll be honest, this is kind of where video comes in. You can write blogs all day long. But remember, everyone on the internet has ADD and they're lazy. ADD in that they won't give you a lot of time. They're going to scan before they read. And lazy because they'd rather watch something than read something. So I'm a big fan of having a video because people would rather sit back and watch it and see the answer to their question, their problem getting solved. So what will make them pay attention? Are you going to be entertaining? What are you going to do? How are you going to keep their attention? You can write blogs, and I'll be honest, text is the only way you're going to get found on Google. You're saying, well, Eric, we said do videos. Well, if you're going to do a video, then transcribe it. In other words, there's websites out there which will watch your website and give you the word for word transcription of what you said. Post that below your video on your website and Google will love you to death. Because you're right, Google will only find you based on the text on your website. Okay. So, or write, if you're a writer, write blogs. You'll show up a lot on the internet. And my favorite, make videos. I mean, I'm kind of excited because over the last week, my views went up by another 100,000. And so my website, or not my website, my YouTube channel now has 1.8 million views. And keep in mind, I'm not having to do anything. I'm not forcing people to watch that. In fact, many times they're watching old videos that are 5, even 10 years old. You have no idea how many people are looking for the answer to what you solve. They're looking for you. And you can use this content as social media bait. Okay. Like that's what I do. When I make a video, I'll post it everywhere. I'll put it in a newsletter. I will post it on Facebook, Twitter, everywhere that I can, directing them all back to my website. So you've got to create content to attract all these people. You know, I tell people all the time, the goal of a website is not traffic, but you have to have traffic. Okay. And if you don't have anything on your website that's interesting to people, no one will ever come. And if no one ever comes to your website, guess what? You don't get the lead. So yeah, this is how you generate traffic. You create content that people actually want. And don't you dare just put up a TV commercial on your website. Ain't no one want to watch that. Okay? It's got to be something where you help someone, where you help them with an answer, where you help solve their problem. I tell people all the time, if you're going to make a video, it's either got to solve my problem, answer a question, or be entertaining. One of those 3 things, or a combination of all 3 if you're good. It's the only reason people watch videos, those 3 reasons. Understand internet traffic. Like I said earlier, visitors are anonymous window shoppers. People will show up at your website all the time, and they will go from page to page and look around and then leave. People are weird sometimes. I'll ask them, so is your website working? And they'll say, yes, we got 800,000 page views. I said, okay. How many customers you get out of that? Well, I don't know. I'm sure some. See, they're happy about their page views. They're happy about the traffic. That's like saying, I have this billboard and 1 million cars go by it every day. And that's how I'm judging the success of my business. Follow me? Unless they tell me who they are, unless they actually buy something I'm selling, it's not successful. It's just traffic. Your store could be full of people, but if none of them ever buy anything, what's the point? You can only see these people's footsteps. And like I said earlier, I can see where they went and how long they stayed there. And I can see the page they left from. And I can even see how they got to me and from where. But I don't know who they are. The only way, listen to me, the only way to get a lead is to convince them to tell you who they are. That's it. And so let's just say this. The purpose of your website is to convince people to tell you who they are. That's it. That's the only way it becomes a lead generating machine. But what you got to know is they won't just tell you because you ask. I mean, think about it. Every one of you has a contact us form, don't you? Uh-huh. Every website has a contact us form. Now, be honest. How many people are filling that out weekly? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hardly any, right? Or just a few. And that's because no one's going to give you their personal information just because you ask. You got to realize that a person's personal information has a value associated with it, and they will not just give it to you, but they will trade for it. Like I said, their personal information, in other words, the ability to contact them, has a value. And they won't just give it away, but they will trade for it. They will trade you for it. Now, this is the secret, folks. Pay close attention. How many of y'all have ever been to a conference, back before the pandemic, right? There had big conferences where you'd meet up with all your colleagues from around the country, but there would also be a big vendor area. And in the vendor area, there'd be booths. And in the booths, there'd be tables. And on these tables would be fish bowls. And what would be in those fish bowls? That's right, business cards. Business cards from who? Other attendees. Now, how did those business cards get in those fish bowls? Did that vendor go around and just secretly sneak them out of your purse or wallet? No. You happily put them in the fish bowls. Why? Because you wanted that koozie. You wanted that luggage tag. You wanted that t-shirt. You wanted the chance to win the iPad. In other words, you traded your personal information for something. And the value of that something, this will be embarrassing, the value of whatever that something was worth more than the value of your privacy. Some of you traded your personal information for, I don't know what, a charger for your cell phone. Okay, so don't tell me you value your privacy. Okay, I can trade you a luggage tag for it. So that's what we're going to have to do with your website. So some of y'all are thinking, oh no, Eric, are you saying that from my contact us form, I'm going to have to promise things to people in order to fill it? No, I'm not saying you have to spend $1, not even $1, because the trade can be information, but it's got to be useful information. It's got to be information that they find worth more than the value of their information. And that's the trick. But I promise, if you do this, your leads will skyrocket. So, what is this information that we offer? Well, I like to think of it as a top 10 list. Okay. We're going to create that kind of comes from the David Letterman kind of school of thought. Now, a top 10 list, the reason I call it that is because people place values on numbers. Think about it this way. If I said, let's pretend I was a realtor, okay? And I said, and I came up with a video and it was called How to Choose a Realtor, okay? How to Choose a Realtor. Or I had another title called 10 Questions to Ask a Realtor Before You Hire them. Which one would you click on? Right, because a human puts value on numbers. A human puts value on quantity. So if you're able to use a number in a title, in a teaser, in an advertisement, in information, people will automatically put value in it. I'd rather have 50 tips to make money than just simply tips to make money. Does that make sense? Keep it short. When you come up with this trade of information, keep it short. And I say make it a PDF or just make it one web page. Make it short, make it easy, make it a 10 list. Don't write a whole blog on it. No one got time for that. Make it short and easy and sweet and simple to digest, but valuable. Okay, like if they printed it out, maybe it was one page, something simple. If they do print it, make sure that your contact information is on it. Because if they hand it around going, wow, this is good information, Fred, you ought to see this, and they pass it around, at least that way you're kind of going viral a little bit, albeit old school on a piece of paper. Now, once you've created this trade, okay, this top 10 list, this most valuable thing. So in the realty example, let's say that I finally come up with one and it's called, how about 10 mistakes you can't afford to make when choosing a realtor? Okay, 10 mistakes you can't afford to make when choosing a realtor. Now, keep in mind that buying and selling a house is one of the most stressful things in the world, second only to a death in the family or divorce. And also, it's the largest financial transaction that most people will ever do. So there's a huge amount of fear. And so if you sit there and you put up a title or a teaser in front of them that says the top 10 mistakes you can't afford to make when choosing a realtor, if you're actually looking for a realtor, sure as heck, you're going to click on that. In this teaser, now keep in mind the teaser goes on the homepage of your website. Because remember what the homepage is? It's the first page of your website. Like when you just type in the www.whatever.com, what comes up? Your homepage, your main page, the front door, if you will. But did you know that your homepage only has one goal, only one purpose? The only purpose of your homepage is to get one more click. That's it. To get another click. What we don't want is people landing on our homepage and then leaving. Too many people try to overdo their homepage and they put everything on it. Ain't no one gonna read that. It needs to be pretty much full of teasers. Something that gets them to go, huh, I want to know that. Click. That's it. And I'll just tell you this, and I've said this before. When a new person lands on your website for the first time, you've got 5 seconds. They're going to scan it from the top left to the bottom right. And only that first screenful they see on their phone or on their computer, that first screenful, they ain't going to scroll. And if they don't see a title, a picture, a phrase, something that says this site might have what I'm looking for, if they don't see that in that first screenful in 5 seconds, guess what? They're going to leave and go to your competitor. They're going to go to the next one in Google results. So you got to make a teaser. And so let's say that I had a realtor website. The teaser that would be on the homepage might be 10 mistakes you can't afford to make before choosing a realtor. Click here. Or read now. Something like that. And that's the sole purpose of the website. You see, what we're actually doing is, even though people feel like they have complete freedom to move around a website any way they want and click on anything they want, we kind of want to direct our customers down a very specific path, a path that leads them to our trade. Keep in mind that everyone does make their decisions based on greed or fear. This is Marketing 101, people. Listen up. If you've never had a marketing class or even a psychology class, listen up. All marketing is based on greed or fear. And that's because every decision you make in your life is based on greed or fear. And I say greed, people go, what do you mean greed? In the case of marketing, greed is not a bad thing. Greed simply means you want something that you currently do not possess. That's it. Okay? You want something that you do not currently possess. Fear is actually a better marketing tool than anything else. Now think about it. If you watch you watch TV and you see those life insurance commercials, and what do they show? They show a happy family all holding hands walking down a beach. And then all of a sudden, the guy comes on and says, but what happens if you're not there all of a sudden? And he fades out. What are they saying? They're basically saying, will your family be destitute if you die? You follow me? They're using fear. And it's totally legitimate. I'm not here to say it's right or wrong. It's called marketing. It's called advertising, and it works. Okay. Every decision you make is based on those two things. Even like going to the bathroom, it's based on what? Fear you might have an accident, right? Buying a car, you really want that car. Everything, it's greed or fear, every single decision. So one of the things you need to realize is, when people buy my product, what motivates them the most in buying my service or product? Is it the fear of something? Or is it because they really want something they don't have? Decide that. And sometimes it can be both. Domino's Pizza, it's all about what? It ain't fear. Selling food is not about fear. It's about greed. Speak to either or both, like I said. And like I said, the goal of that teaser, that little click, that little button, that little section at the top of your website, it's basically trying to convince them to start to go towards the trade. That is what we're talking about here. Okay. We must make them want to click. Now, when they click, what are they going to get? Well, we promised them the top 10 mistakes you can't afford to make when choosing a realtor, right? So they're going to click on that teaser. And what am I going to do? I'm just going to give it to them. I'm just going to give them right there, the top 10 right there. They can read it. You're saying, but Eric, what do you mean? I thought you were going to trade. I thought you were going to ask them for their information and then you were going to give it to them as a trade. No, 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 no. It ain't that easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to offer them something and we're just going to give it to them. No strings attached. Not going to require them to give us one thing. You're saying, well, Eric, I don't get it. I thought we had to get them. Just hush, listen. The key is to understand the trust barrier. The reason people don't immediately go buy something on the internet is because they don't trust you. Think about it. You're the same way. When you go to a website you've never been to before, you don't trust them. You're not going to immediately click buy now. You're going to research them a little. You're going to look it up. You're going to at least think about it a little bit because your trust barrier is too high. The barrier that keeps you from what? Giving you their information, buying one of their products or services. That trust barrier is too high. So you as the website, you as the business owner, you've got to lower that barrier so low that they will happily get over it and trust you and give you their information. So what I do is this. I give them the information but down at the very bottom of that, I say this. You know, the top 10 mistakes you can't afford to make when choosing a realtor is one of our most popular reports, and we hope you enjoyed that. However, we would love to email you our 50 mistakes you can't afford to make when selling your house. Think about it. 50 mistakes you can't afford to make when selling your house. And we want to email that to you. And this is where you ask for the information. So people ask me all the time, they say, Eric, why do you just give away information? I tell them all the time, you know, if you'll just go to my website and watch every video I do, you would never need to hire me. I tell people that, but that's not what happens. And if you watch my videos, and some of you have, you'll know that I don't require anything in return. I don't try to sell you something. I don't do a bait and switch. I don't say, you know, here's the top 5, but you know, blah, blah, blah. I don't do that. It's not a cry to get someone to call me up. If I learn something new, I make a video about it. And that's because a business mentor a long time ago taught me something. And he said, if you give it away, they will pay. If you give it away, they will pay. And as a web designer, I thought I can't imagine what I would do. I mean, do I need to really make a video on everything I know about web design, everything I know about online marketing, actually telling people how they can do it without me? He said, yep. So I did. And what ended up happening is this. People would watch my videos and like them. I mean, I actually tell people how to do stuff. And they can do it themselves. And that's how you get a lot of views on YouTube, by the way, if it's actually a useful video. And so I tell them that. But here's the deal. And you're right, there will be some people who do that. But a lot of people will watch it and they will say, you know what? I didn't realize it was going to be that involved to do that. Let's just call him. He seems to know what he's doing. You see, the secret reason for those videos, the secret reason for me just giving information away like that is to establish my credentials, is to establish my expertise. And you need to remember, listen, people would rather do business with an expert than a salesman. People would rather do business with an expert than a salesman. And if they have to pick between all of your competitors and you're the one who helped them make a better decision, they're going to go with you every time. And that's what happened with me. If you give it away, they will pay. Like I said, people trust experts, not salesmen. So yeah, we made our initial offer, right? The 10 mistakes you can't afford to make when choosing a realtor. But then we made our bigger offer and we gave that one away. We gave the first one away totally, no strings attached. They could leave. We would never know they existed. But then we require information to get the bigger one with the excuse that we want to email it to them. That's where we put our form, is at the bottom of that page, is at the bottom of where we did our top 10. Okay. I promise if you see, a lot of times people get this wrong. They try to shortcut it and they do half of what I'm telling them. They'll do that top 10, but in order to get the top 10, they got to give their information first. They don't trust you yet. But here's the deal. I offer them the information. I give them the information. I made a promise. I kept my promise. So now I'm making a bigger promise. They are more likely to trust that I will keep that one because what? I already kept one. Does that make sense? You'll get twice as many leads if you use this dual content approach. So then you have them fill out the form. So how much information do you ask for on this form? Too many of you are asking for too much information. How many times have you ever landed on a contact us page, where they have a form and they're asking for everything but your mother's maiden name and social security number? And you're going, I ain't about to fill all that out. So you don't. And for some of you, that's why no one's filling out your forms, because you're asking for too much and you haven't earned the right to receive it. So I tell people, you only ask for 4 things. That's it. I don't care what business you're in. You ask for 4 things: name, phone, email, and then some open-ended option like ask us anything, kind of a big blank they can fill in if they want. And that's optional. But name, phone, and email are not optional. They're required. Why? And some of y'all are going, Eric, why are you asking for phone and email? If all we're really looking for is just the minimum information to contact them, why are we asking for phone and email? Why are we requiring both of those? Because this goes back to my own personal experience. You'd be surprised how many people can't spell their own email address correctly or get their phone number right when typing it in, especially on a phone. And so what ends up happening is I use one of those, either the phone or the email, as a backup to the other in case they screw up one of them. Trust me, it happens more than you realize. And if I was only asking for one of them and they got it wrong, I could never contact them ever. And they start to think that I'm ignoring them when it was really just their fat fingers. So name, phone, email, and then it kind of ask us anything. But that's it. You don't need their address. You don't need their title in their company. You don't need any of that. You can get that later. All we need is just the bare minimum necessary to contact. And that's the secret. Because when we ask for the phone or email, then we can reach out and here's what we say. Hey, I just wanted to make sure, this is Eric over at so-and-so, you filled out our form and I emailed it out to you, but I want to make sure you got it. You see, our excuse to call is to verify that they got the second big report, the big report that we were going to email to them. But then while you have them on the phone, guess what? You now have a lead and you're on the phone with them. And your goal at that point, well, that's up to you. The website has done its part. You are now talking to a lead. The rest is up to you to make the sale. I promise if you do this right, it will make the biggest difference in the world. And that's why I tell people when it comes to a website, you got to realize that all roads lead to Rome. We put teasers on the homepage And our sole goal is to get people to click on those teasers, which then what? Take them down the road of the trade. When I say all roads lead to Rome, I mean all paths, no matter where they start on our website, all paths will lead us to a trade. All paths will lead us to a form, a lead generation form. Yes, those people on our website are going to feel like they can go anywhere they want and they're clicking and it's their choice, but really they're following the path that we want them to follow. Because it's kind of like laying out carrots for a rabbit, you know, leading them to the box. They choose to eat the carrot and they choose to go after the next carrot. Now I know you're going, wait, we're not trapping people. No, I'm talking about getting a lead. I was just using a rabbit metaphor. One of the things I tell you is to point to free but useful information. Okay. Give them enough information to trust you. And then offer useful information. It needs to be useful. Like that's why I said you need to come up with good titles. You need to come up with, the 10 mistakes, use the top 10 report, use greed and fear. I'm telling you, one of the big pieces is the bait, coming up with the right bait. And the stronger the bait, the more fish you'll catch. Okay. So I would spend the majority of my time coming up with that report, coming up with that initial trade and that secondary trade. But it's got to be tied to either the greed or the fear that people feel. All that information that they follow eventually leads them to the form, and the form creates the lead. And then you're just going to rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And your website ends up becoming a lead generating machine. Well, this one always has lots of questions. And so I wanted to leave a little extra time at the end because I'm here to tell you this is very, 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 very important. And most of you out there, you don't have shopping carts on your website. And so what you're trying to do is to get people to call you. You're trying to get people to come into your store. You're trying to get people to email you or fill out the form on your website. This is going to be one of the most important sessions I've ever taught. So I wanted to also give you time for questions.
While we're waiting for questions, Eric, can you go back to that one slide that you had on 10 leads equals this amount? You had it at the front and it was really interesting how.
Oh, you mean the value of a lead?
Yeah.
Oh, the very first slide.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That one. That one?
Yeah, that one. I think that is so interesting.
Yeah, it's because a lot of people, they only put dollar values on customers. And what I'm saying is, in order for you to seek out leads, you got to realize that leads have values too. Because you can almost predict how much money you're going to make based on the amount of leads you get. So it's actually a lot simpler than even I wrote here. Okay. And that's why I did the math so simple. If I had 10 leads on average and, they make, on average, I make $100. If I sold every one of them, I'd make $1,000, right? But I'm not going to. My close rate in this one's only half. So I'm only going to sell only to half of those people. So, but like I said, every single person should be able to do this equation, this calculation. And I also recommend that SBDC counselors probably do this little example with their clients as well, for those who are seeking leads. Any questions?
I want to update everybody just real quickly. I know we're closing out this week, but we have a lot of webinars still coming up, and I'm working as quickly as possible, putting more into the website. But coming up Monday, LLCs explore the pros and cons. Eric comes back on Tuesday with 7 powerful offline methods. You might tell us a little bit about that. We have Cash is King, cash management for your business. We also have a bilingual session, accessing financial resources. They owe you money. And then we have PPP, EIDL, and employee retention tax credits, tax implications if you're tax ready. That's all in 1 week.
Yeah, the offline one, mostly what I talk about is online, how to do things online. Here's some online tricks and social media tricks and things to do to get more business. But there's also a lot of offline things. In other words, things that don't have to do with the internet at all that businesses can do to help generate leads and sales. And a lot of small businesses never had a formal marketing class. And I'm here to tell you that the internet isn't replacing all advertising. It's just augmenting it. It's changing it. But a lot of the same old basic, and I mean basic things that you can do, a lot of these businesses don't know them. And there are also some really neat little tricks I've learned along the way and they're offline, they're low tech, they have nothing to do with the internet. They can really make a huge difference in your sales. So that's what that one is about. You know what I could do in this, oh, we have a question. Let's see. Oh, well, thank you. We have seen this information many times. Never have we heard such a great explanation with great examples. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. You know what? I'll give some more examples then. While we wait for another question, if there is one. Like, let's say that you sell art. Okay, let's say what you sell is art, but you don't sell it online. You don't have a shopping cart. What you want is people to call you up and want to buy the art or something like that, or come into your gallery or something like that. So how can this apply to them? Well, simple. The teaser might be, how to value a piece of art. 10 mistakes most people make when valuing art. Or how to know if you will love this art forever. 10 ways to, you follow me? What makes people buy art? And you got to ask yourself that. And that's why I said in the beginning, what problem do you solve? What question do you answer? Because if you can speak to that, when you learn what the problem is, then you can offer a solution and they will grab it every single time. Okay. And maybe what you sell is antiques. Okay. That's a big one too. That's an easy one. You want people to buy antiques. So you can, of course, you could actually do that with a shopping cart. But if you wanted them to come to your antique store or to call you up, or maybe you wanted to buy their antiques, you wanted to be a place where you could sell their antiques. So you could do how to choose an antique dealer to sell your antiques, or, top 10 mistakes people make when, in an estate sale. Or there's so many different ways. You just have to think, what are the fears? You gotta realize that your business caters to either a fear or greed. Okay. And you just got to think what that is. And you got to realize what teaser is going to make people make people click. What is it going to, it's going to make them click. Okay. They will have no choice but to click. Okay. And like I said, usually fear is the biggest one and it works great. Let's see. I do have a shopping cart on my website, but figuring out what problem I solve is difficult. I make soaps and other bath body products. Making my products pop up on a search and then making personal decision to try has been very difficult. Okay, here's the deal. People buy soaps from experts, believe it or not. If people simply thought that all soap was the same, then they would look at price. Price would be their only determinant. Okay. So what you've got to convince them is that you're different. You've got to convince them that your soaps are different than everybody else's, and you've got to somehow share that. And one of the easiest ways is to talk about, either the advantages of the soap you make. What are your competitive advantages? And if I were sitting right in front of you, I would probably ask, what makes your soap better than everybody else's? And that's called a competitive advantage. And then you would tell me, and maybe it's like, well, you use a special ingredient only found out in the backwoods behind my house. And then they exist nowhere else in the entire world. And it gives your skin, there's amazing qualities for your skin. Wow. You see what I'm saying? Or maybe it's where you source your materials. Maybe it's how it's made, the process you use. There's no machines involved. Maybe it's all hand done. You know, the point is, you've got to find something. You've got to find something for people to make a decision on. And that really is, you want to be an expert. You truly, truly, truly want to be an expert. And so what I would do is probably start making videos on skincare. I would make videos on soap and judging soap and how to judge one soap against another. And you could make one called here's a good one. 5 ingredients that should never be in your soap. Ooh, I would click on that. Okay. And if
I
you
would
want to,
totally click on that.
exactly.
And I would.
I'm telling you, fear works. Fear works.
Yes, and the value that you get from it. So if you're an expert, yes, I want to buy from the expert. And Jocelyn says, thank you so much. Also, Jim says, apologize for getting here late and look forward to watching what I missed when this gets posted to YouTube, and is looking for your webinar coming up on Tuesday. Let me kind of explain to everyone is that once we get done today, it'll go back up on our website on the tab on demand. So you can watch it on demand. It leaves on demand on our website 7 days later, and then we post it to YouTube. So I chatted over the link to our YouTube channel, and we have a lot of Eric's webinars up there already.
Yeah, feel free to watch them. That's what they're there for. And of course, I thank my wonderful host for allowing that to be out there for people to look at.
Awesome. If that's all the questions for today, I'm going to go ahead and pop off. I'm going to pop Eric off, pop you guys off, but you guys have a great rest of your week. Bye.